Why are face-to-face communities going to be essential for institutions of the future? And on this channel, I talk a lot about technology and what online institutions might look like in the future. But I actually think for some of the most important roles in society, you can't have everything just online. You need some version of face-to-face. And maybe that's something like on Zoom, like on video, maybe. But I do think there is an absolutely essential element to in-person communities when it comes to upholding the kinds of values that the most important institutions uphold. My basic argument here is that there's a lot of information that's transferred between people when they get together in a face-to-face environment, and that this information cannot be transferred very well in online spaces. As a matter of fact, I think some of the benefit that people experience in a lot of online spaces is that it's not transferring that information that they don't want known about themselves. And this is information like gut reactions people have to things, or trigger points, or the energy in the room around a topic, the sort of felt enthusiasm when a group gets together, or the felt non-enthusiasm. Sometimes you present an idea to a group and you can just kind of feel that it falls flat. It's the information that's transferred about particular people in the group. You kind of learn people's strengths and their weaknesses when you meet with them in person. And a lot of that is not in the words that are spoken, but it's in people's reactions as you watch them, as you see, okay, this person is really courageous in the face of challenging information, and we can kind of see how they respond. You might see this other person is quite fearful and reactive and not great, but occasionally contributes these really insightful points. So you can kind of place people's strengths and weaknesses according to their motivation and their real like human reactions to things. And that just doesn't translate well online. All right, now if I'm talking about institutions, I would like to define institutions. So here's the definition of an institution that I will use. Institutions are the formal and informal set of rules, norms, beliefs, roles, rights, and responsibilities that give structure to the interactions between people. So this includes organizations like nonprofits, corporations, universities. It includes cultural norms like marriage, religious rules, calendar days that tend to go a certain way. It includes expectations about whether people will follow through with contracts, expectations about how you will behave in the market setting. Do you negotiate prices or not? Is that taboo or not? Institutions include systems like the legal system, the penal system, or the educational system. Institutions include markets like eBay and online markets, like supermarkets and the rules and norms that shape the normal supermarket, like the stock market. People don't want to have to learn an entirely new set of rules and expectations every time they enter the market. That would be way too cognitively taxing. Instead, they want the same set of rules and norms to be at play anytime they walk into a supermarket. And that just makes it way easier to interact with that particular system. Okay, now if I'm going to connect this idea of the need for face-to-face communities with institutions of the future, I need to acknowledge that institutions of the future will almost certainly involve some kind of online space. And there's probably going to be creative versions of institutions that we haven't yet thought about. What I'm trying to do in this video is help people who are trying to brainstorm institutions of the future to keep in mind that a lot of these institutions are going to need to have some element of them that involves face-to-face communities that build long-standing relationships within those communities over time. That doesn't mean there won't be a heavy online element, but incentivizing the building, the commitment to communities of people that you learn their personalities, that you learn how to deal with them, that you learn how to manage conflict with them, that you sort of commit to long enough to go through the ups and the downs with that community of people, I think that's going to make institutions healthier if they have versions of that are sort of parts of these new creative institutions. Next, what do I think the face-to-face communities bring to institutions that make them so necessary? And there's several. One of the most important things here is, I think, an ability to work through conflict with people. And you have to know someone really well to know where are their pressure points, what kinds of things are going to push their buttons, perhaps irrationally, because every human being has things we react to irrationally based on our past experiences. Every human being has areas of strength where we're able to handle things that perhaps other people couldn't. And working through conflict, working through differences, working through conflicting values, that's all part of making an institution function. The better you know an individual, the more effective potentially you are at negotiating with them. And there will be a need for some types of institutions that involve compromise and negotiation between different groups. So having people who know each other well enough to negotiate, that's essential. Now, the second benefit of in-person communities is that you have a better sense for which roles people should fulfill within an institution. I'm not a fan of nepotism. I think it's a real problem. But the reason I think nepotism is sometimes persistent is because you don't really know a person's real strengths or weaknesses from anything you can put down into data or on a resume. You kind of have to know that person pretty well to know, is this person going to be a good inspirational leader? Does this person have the personality or character to stand up to someone they need to stand up to, or to speak an uncomfortable truth to a group they belong to? And when you build a community where you know each other well over time, you're able to envision people into roles in that community that best take advantage of their personal strengths. And you're able to sort of come up with checks and balances that appropriately mitigate their weaknesses. And I think this is an unacknowledged thing about checks and balances, which is that yes, there can be systems that have sort of structural checks and balances that work universally for everyone. But sometimes those same checks and balances can be dead weight or unnecessary and can actually hold an institution back if they get too heavy. In fact, sometimes the checks and balances can be a source of entrenchment of institutions, because what tends to happen is you have bad experiences with people, you build in these institutional structures to hold people accountable who have that particular weakness, but those build up over time and sort of take over. And if you have these in-person communities, instead of using all of these formalized rules to protect against people's personal tyrannies or people's personal flaws, you sort of have the community who all has a good intuition for a person's weaknesses. The community itself can come up with either creative ways of holding them accountable, or sometimes just the community's knowledge of that person's character will lead the community to rise up and hold them accountable in the ways needed. Now, the third benefit relates to trust. It relates to the fact that each person is trustworthy in some areas and not trustworthy in other areas. There's no one who's perfectly trustworthy in every realm. Like, some people are really trustworthy to show up on time, to keep a clean house, to follow through with commitments, but not so trustworthy at leadership or taking into account other people's opinions. Other people are trustworthy to check their facts, but not trustworthy to come up with creative ideas. And because trust involves so many dimensions, and because trust needs to be tailored to the specific circumstance and the specific person, the only way that real effective trust can happen, actually, I take that back. This isn't the only way, but one of the best ways for efficient effective trust to happen is by learning about people over time, where you see those people acting in many different scenarios. You see them at their best and their worst. You see them in different moods. You see them deal with conflict. You see them deal with peace. You see enough of their character to really know exactly how to trust them. Sometimes we think of trust as being binary in a way that it's really not. It's like there's lots of people that I trust to show up on time, but I don't trust in leadership. And vice versa. People I trust as leaders, but I don't trust them to always answer emails or always follow through. And developing a personalized trust for each person in a group, that's something that tends to happen much more effectively in in-person communities where you can observe people's emotional reactions and sort of physicality. You can read their body language to place that trust. And then the last reason I think in-person communities are going to be important for institutions is just because online institutions, purely online institutions, tend to peter out in a way that face-to-face communities do not. There's something about the commitment you have to people when you have to look them in the eye and tell them, yeah, I'm leaving the group, versus when you can just sort of check out online, that leads to this stickiness and this personal commitment that I think is necessary for communities to build over time and go through the growing pains of figuring out conflict and negotiating differences and handling unexpected setbacks. All of that kind of stuff is necessary to the evolution of new institutions. And I think in-person communities are really well set up to handle that, whereas online communities have this tendency for people to come in and come out in over a period of a few months. So that's just my overall argument that I think as we're envisioning institutions of the future, we really need to be thinking about how could the spaces online be connected to communities that are offline. And we should come up with creative ways of doing that. If you have ideas on how to make that happen, how to connect the in-person space with the online space, write them below, because we're just trying to brainstorm on this channel.